all of us get to a point, we all face something in our lives that our life just changes dramatically. Just you're going one way and you just almost turn the total different way, the total opposite way in a sense. And I remember the one time that really happened, one of the times that really happened in my life. It was almost 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago. And I had just moved into a guest house of some people that went to the church that I was going to. And as I was at this guest house, as I lived in this guest house, and I moved into this guest house because it was closer to the church, because I was going to school at the same time in San Diego. And the school was a little bit farther from the church, and I was working at this church, and they moved into this house, and it had a little guest house, and they're like, hey, you can rent a room from this guest house, and you can live there. And I mean, it was right down the street from my church, and I said, hey, that sounds like a great idea. I'll go ahead and do that. And so I moved into this guest house. And as I moved into this guest house, their son brought home this girl. And she was gorgeous. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I saw her and I thought, man, she's beautiful. But I thought, well, the son's talking to her, whatever, no big deal. As time went on, he brought this girl over a couple more times, and the girl and I kind of had friendly conversation or whatever along with the son. But I was like, well, this is his girlfriend, I guess. I didn't really know too much about what was going on. We conversated a little bit. A couple months goes by. This girl moves back to Tennessee. And when she moved back to Tennessee, the son and her stopped talking. So I did what every red-blooded American man would do, and I friended her on Facebook. And I can remember this night very vividly, the very first conversation I had with this girl, and I knew from that point that my life was going to be different, because the very first conversation I had with this girl, I asked her 3 questions. And the first question was, hey, how would you feel about getting married on the beach in our bathing suits? And she was like, I think that's awesome. In fact, I think that's every Tennessee girl's dream wedding, is to have on the beach. And I was like, oh, that's cool, And so then I was like, well, right on. And so then the next question that I asked following that was, how would you feel about not getting a wedding ring, not getting some big rock or whatever, but instead getting tattoos? They're more permanent. They're cheaper. She said, I think that that's a wonderful idea. I don't really care to wear jewelry all that often anyway, and so I think that that's a great idea. It'll save some money. I think that that's awesome. And I was like, all right. So I thought, well, let's go for the trifecta. And I asked, the third question that I asked was, I said, how would you feel about being homeless and living on the beach? And she said, the beaches have public restrooms, public showers. I would be okay with that. And I was like, and I knew after those 3 questions and her response to those 3 questions, I said, I am going to marry this girl. I knew at that point I was going to marry this girl. So 6 months goes by, and I'm giving a sermon to the youth at the church, and I was actually giving a sermon on lust that night. And so I asked this girl to come up front for an illustration. And as she comes up front, I had her sit on a stool, and I asked this girl to marry me. She had a broken arm, but I placed an engagement ring on that broken arm. Well, the finger of that broken arm. Be a big ring. I said, will you marry me? Will you spend the rest of your life with me? And she said, yes. But here's the thing, 6 more months goes by, and then we're standing before friends and family, and we're standing in front of a pastor, and he had to ask her again, will you marry him? Will you take him to be your husband? And she said yes. Which I was shocked. I don't think she knew what she was getting into. I don't think I really fully knew what I was getting into. We know Mom and Dad didn't know what they were getting into. But she said yes. And from that point on, our life has been different. Our life has changed. There is no doubt about it. We can't do all of the same things that we were doing. We don't necessarily desire to do all of the same things that we were doing. Our life is now different. And today, we're going to be in Mark chapter 8. So if you have your Bibles, if you have your electronic Bible or your physical Bible, you can open your Bible to Mark chapter 8. And we're at a point where the disciples themselves are going to be at a turning point in their lives. In the book of Mark, what we're going to be talking about today, if you look through the book of Mark, this is a turning point in the book of Mark. There have been, from the beginning of the book, it's been implied to us, if you read through the book, it's been implied to us from the first chapter of Jesus, when Jesus was baptized, it's been implied to us that there's something different about this man. We've seen that the demons and Satan know who this man is. We've seen that when Jesus calmed the storms, that even the disciples had to ask themselves, what's up with this guy? He has some type of control that over the wind, over the waves that we don't understand. We've seen in his teaching that he's taught with authority that nobody else is taught with. And the teachers even questioned him, how do you teach with that kind of authority? We've seen him be able to forgive sins. And so there's all of these implications that there's something different about this man named Jesus. But the disciples, it's never been made clear at this point to the disciples. See, I think a lot of times we read through the Bible we've kind of grown up in church. We kind of know what the end story is. We kind of know what's going on. We kind of know what we've been taught, what we've been passed down. But do we really put ourselves in the place of the disciples? Where all of this stuff is unraveling as they live day in and day out with this guy named Jesus. And so we're in the book of Mark in chapter 8. And we're going to be starting in verse 27. And it says this, starting in verse 27, it says, Jesus and his disciples went to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked them, who do people say that I am? And we're going to stop there for a second, because what you need to understand, and this was the one thing that I really wanted to have the PowerPoint for, was I had a picture that kind of shows this. But in Caesarea Philippi, it was kind of the place where there was just people worshipped a lot of different gods. They had their idols, and in the sides of the mountains, right, like all of these things that are up here, right, the these sound barriers that are up here, imagine that those were kind of like holes cut into the mountains, like little caves cut into the mountains. And they would place their idols in these things, right? And so Jesus and his disciples are coming up into Caesarea Philippi. And as they come up into Caesarea Philippi, they see where all of these gods are being worshipped. And I don't think that it was just some weird coincidence that all of a sudden in the last 2 or 3 years that they've spent together, that it's now that Jesus looks around and he kind of says, hey, who do people say that I am? See, I think he's looking at all of these other gods. He's looking at all of these idols, and he's baffled, and it just kind of sickens him. And he's looking around, he's saying, what are people saying about me? And I ask you that question today. What are people saying about Jesus? Who do people say that Jesus is? See, a lot of you, I say a lot of you, some of you are just got done with school. Maybe you just graduated high school. Maybe you just got done with your semester. Maybe you just got done with your first year at college, or maybe you got done with college or whatever. And at the end of the school year, you have these tests, final exam tests. And this is kind of the disciples' final exam test. And there's a little bit of a warm-up question to the final exam. See, this final exam, it's a pass or fail exam. It's not like a percentage, it's a pass or a fail. And there's only one question. How many of you guys would really like to take that test? A final exam, one question, pass or fail. It's right or wrong, no other options. And there's one warm-up question, and that warm-up question to the disciples is, who do people say that I am? And so the disciples' response says, some say that you are John the Baptist, others say that you're Elijah, and still others say that you're one of the prophets. And so that's what people were saying about Jesus then. See, they didn't really fully know who Jesus was then. They may have had maybe an idea or a part of knowing who Jesus was, but they really didn't know who he was. Who do people say that Jesus is? Do they say that he's a good teacher? Do they say that he's some cosmic cop up there that's standing up in heaven and ready to strike down whoever makes a mistake? Do they say that he's like a vending machine, and so they just kind of pray to him and they're like, oh, I want a new car, oh, I want this, or oh, I want that, and they just expect that Jesus is this person that's just supposed to provide for them? Or is Jesus like this bail bondsman? Hey, I'm in trouble, Jesus, I need you, and so I'm going to pray to you, I'm going to spend time with you right now because I need you to bail me out. And then once you bail me out, I'm going to go off and do my own thing again. But hey, it's cool because you'll get me out of trouble. It's cool because you'll take care of me when I'm in a bind. I mean, you've probably heard the different things that people call Jesus, the different ways that people think about Jesus. Oh, well, Jesus is simply a loving God, and so you can do whatever you want because he loves you. Don't worry about it. Live your life however you want. He loves you. And then there's the opposite side. Don't step out of line. Don't look like this. Don't act like this because he's going to strike you down. Jesus hates anybody that had an abortion. Jesus hates any homosexuals. Jesus hates... And that's the other side of it. People have these ideas of who Jesus is, right? And you know what they are. But here's the deal. That was only the warm-up question. That's the easy answer. That's the easy one to take care of, is what are other people saying about Jesus? Who do other people claim that Jesus is? But here it is. Your one question. This is your final exam. This is what you got to deal with. This is the pass or fail question. But what about you, he asked. Who do you say that I am? And again, that question is asked to you. Who do you say that Jesus is? And I look around and I think a lot of you are probably been brought up in church. I mean, you're in the South, so you're American and you're Christian. That's just the way that it is, right? Not even just Christian, but you're probably Southern Baptist because you're in the South. I mean, let's just be honest about it. People think that way, right? I mean, if I go out here and I ask 10 people, I would almost guarantee you that if I just asked 10 random people in the city of Columbia, what's your religion? They would say Christian or Southern Baptist, probably 8 out of 10 at least. If I went into that and I started asking them, well, how often do you go to church? A lot of them would say every Sunday. And that's enough. Because to them, Jesus is a record keeper. So as long as I'm there to mark down all of the good records that I'm passing, I'm good to go. And so I say, who is Jesus to you? And the way that you answer that question will change your life forever. Who is Jesus to you? And Peter speaks up. And for anybody that's read the Bible continuously, they know Peter's the guy that opens his mouth and 99% of the time sticks his foot in his mouth. And so I love Peter because he speaks first and thinks later. And here's the thing. You do that enough times, one time you're bound to be good. You're bound to be right. And this is that one time. Peter speaks up and he says, you are the Messiah. Messiah is Hebrew for Christ. Christ is the Greek term. Messiah is the Hebrew term. You are the Christ. And Jesus warned them not to tell anyone. Peter said, you are the Christ. And I think a lot of you, a lot of us in here, if I was to ask you, who is Jesus to you, and we were to sit down and have a conversation, who is Jesus? A lot of you would say, well, he's the Christ. In fact, a lot of you would just probably think that was his last name. You'd be like, well, Jesus Christ, duh. But that's not a last name. That is a title. That is a title saying you are the Christ, you are the Son of God, you are Lord. And understanding that that's a title and not a last name, and understanding what the Christ means will change your life. You don't have an option. Because here's the thing. See, we think that it's that simple. That this is our pass or fail final, and we think that it's as simple as giving the right answer with our mouth, saying, you are the Christ. That's it. Said and done. Pass the test. I'm going to heaven. I'm good to go. But what I'm going to challenge you, and what we're going to find out later on in this passage, saying that Jesus is the Christ is not a lip service. The question is who do you say that Jesus is with the way that you live your life? Who do you say that Jesus is with the way that you live your life? Is Jesus still the Christ in the way that you live your life? See, I think Peter had the right answer, but here's the problem. We go on, and it says this in verse 31. Right after Peter says, "You're the Messiah, you're the Christ," verse 31, he then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and he must be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Okay, wait. Maybe some of you didn't hear that. Peter pulled Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. He's the Christ. He's the Messiah. I just said it. But he pulled him aside and said, "Okay, wait a minute, Jesus. You don't understand what's going on, dude." He pulls Jesus aside and he says, "Jesus, you don't know what you're talking about. That's not going to help your cause. You don't need to be going and dying. You don't need it. That's not going to happen." See, here's the thing. Peter had the right answer. Peter was probably raised in the church or whatever, and he had the right answer. But he didn't fully understand the implications of Jesus being the Christ. Because he still thought that you are my Christ, and I can decide how you're going to live your life. I can decide what you're going to do and what that's going to look like. Because he said, "Jesus, you're in the wrong, dude. You need to stop saying what you're saying, because you're not going to go and die. You're not going to get killed. That's not going to happen to you." And we look at Peter and we think, man, geez, Peter's ridiculous. Peter's an idiot. Who would pull Jesus aside and say that's not how things are going to go down? I would. I've done it. Because here's the thing. Sometimes Jesus tells me to do things that I don't really feel like doing. See, there's been times where Jesus says, "Hey, love your enemies." And I'm like, I don't really think that I want to love them. They haven't been very nice to me. They make fun of me. Why would I want to love them? I don't think you really understand, Jesus. I'm not going to live my life that way. Jesus calls us not to throw our Bibles. Jesus calls us to live in a world that tells us that sexuality is something that you just go and you just have sex with as many people as you want. Don't worry about it. That's just great practice. But Jesus says, hey, in that world that glorifies sex outside of marriage, what I want for you and my plan for you is to have sex in marriage. And if you wait till then, and that's where you do it, that's going to be the best plan for you. But Jesus, that doesn't make sense, dude. All of these people they said it's great. Jesus tells us not to get drunk. But we say, Jesus, dude, you don't understand, bro. Have you ever fully been wasted, man? Because when you are, dude, it's so much fun. People laugh and people have a good time. I'm so much looser. Jesus, you don't get this, dude. See, we pull him aside and we tell him how we're going to live. We tell him what the way that life needs to be lived, because he doesn't really fully understand. And the more that I think about this whole idea, the more that I realize maybe Peter's not as big of an idiot as I thought. Because, I start to see myself in Peter a lot. Jesus calls us to give, to sacrifice, And that just doesn't sound good. That just doesn't sound like something I want to do. Jesus, if I give you 10%, I'm going to be 10% short on paying the bills. How can I do that? See, Jesus' way doesn't always make sense. And as I find my way back to Mark chapter 8 here, we're going to find out even more so how much Jesus calls us to not make sense. So Peter rebukes Jesus. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You don't have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Is Jesus calling you Satan today? Is Jesus calling you Satan because you're trying to convince him that your way is the right way? Are you basically falling into the same pattern of life that Satan is by saying, look, I can be God of my own life. I don't need you to be the Christ. I don't need you to be the Messiah. All I need is for you to say, hey, put me on the list to get into heaven. But everything else I'll take care of. Because that's what Peter did. "Get behind me, Satan." Goes on, it says, then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the angels." Talk about an upside down world. Jesus' plan, Jesus' best plan says, hey, you want to save your life? Then lose it. Lose it for me and for the gospel. What does it mean? What does it mean to make the statement that Jesus, you are the Christ? Here it is. To say that Jesus is the Christ means that you will lay down your life and say Jesus, say Lord, it's not about me and the way that I want to live my life anymore. It's about me trying to live my life in accordance to how you want me to live it. In essence, you will lose your old life. Lose everything there is about your old life, and you will live your life new. When I made this commitment before friends, family, pastor, and said, I want to marry this girl. When I made that commitment, there was definitely a part of my old life that I had to lay down, that I had to leave there. Because let me just tell you, it doesn't really work out very well for a married couple when one of them says, hey, yeah, I want to marry her, but hey, it's cool because I'm going to go out and I'm going to go and hang out with all these girls over here and I'm going to hang out with these girls over here, but it's cool because we're married. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And people would think, well, that guy is a jerk. That guy is a loser. Yeah, I had to give up something when I married my wife. I had to give up a lifestyle that says I'm single for a lifestyle that says I am committed to this woman. Let me just tell you, when you commit your life to Jesus Christ, you will have to give up something. You will have to give up. You will have to give up your desire to say, hey, you know what? This looks really good. This looks like something that I want to do. This looks really fun. But you know what? Jesus has a better idea for me. In the relationship with my wife and before I met Courtney, before Courtney and I were together, I loved movies. I would watch movies all the time, right? There was probably very few movies out there. I worked at Blockbuster for like 2 years, and there were probably very few movies out there that I hadn't seen. And if I hadn't seen it, then I probably knew most everything about it, because I loved movies. I just did. I wanted to make movies. I was everything about movies. And I thought growing up, you know what? It's totally okay. It's a movie. I know that it's fake. It's all right. All of my Christian friends are going to these movies. It's okay. And there were a lot of movies that I watched that I had no reason to be watching. There were a lot of movies that I watched that had a lot of sex in them, that had a lot of nudity in them. And I liked it. And I still called myself a Christian. I still would have given the answer, Jesus, you are the Christ. That would have still been my answer. And I would have thought that I was good, that I was going to heaven, it's all right. I can live my life the way that I want. Because I was saying, Jesus, you don't understand, dude. It's a whole new culture. Girls walk around half naked all the time, so what's the problem with going to a movie? Over the last 5 years, I've realized it's not healthy for my marriage to watch a lot of these movies. Now, I am not standing down here and telling you what you can and cannot watch. That's up to you. That's between you and God. You need to decide, hey, what do you struggle with? But I'm telling you, I am confessing to you that my issue was the fact that I would watch movies that did not benefit my relationship, that were not healthy for my relationship, that were just not good for me to be watching in my marriage. Because it puts pictures in my head that are not of my wife. And so to this day, there are certain movies that I will see the previews for, and I'm like, man, that looks like it would be a funny movie. But you know what? I also know, because I know the director or the actor or the type of movie that it is, that I probably shouldn't be watching. And so there's a lot of movies that I have given up watching because I've decided two things. One, it's better for my marriage that I don't watch them. And two, and really more importantly, it's better for my relationship with God that I don't watch them. See, because I justified it. I would be like, well, I'm not necessarily watching pornography. I'm not going into the 18 and over section or anything like that. There's a lot of things that I choose not to watch now. Not because I'm like, oh, I'm sure there's not parts of that I would laugh at or whatever. But it's a thing that I said, you know what? I would rather lose my life and gain the world. I would rather lose my life and gain a great marriage. I would rather lose my life and gain a great relationship with Christ. I would rather lose those movies and be way better off for it, and miss out on some conversation, on some inside jokes because other people had seen these movies. Now that's just me. I don't know what your deal is. But I know this. I know that that there's kind of three ways that we respond to who Christ is in our life. When Jesus asks us, who do you say that I am? There's three different ways that we kind of respond. And my question to you today is, do those three ways line up? First of all, there's what we say with our mouth. There's what we say with our mouth. Do we even claim? Do we even think that Jesus is Christ? Do we even believe that to be true? First of all, that would be where you would probably need to start. So do you believe that with your mouth? When people ask you, who is Jesus? Are you willing to say, He is the Christ? The way number two is in your life, with the way that you live your life. If people watched you day in and day out, would they notice that you believe Jesus is the Christ? See, there was this guy, his name is Harvey Carey. He used to be a youth pastor on the inner city of Chicago. And while he was youth pastoring there, and for those that don't know, the inner city of Chicago is a little bit of a dangerous place. There's a lot of gangs and things like that. And as he was youth pastoring there, there were a lot of gangs and stuff like that he would be ministering to. He would go to like drug houses and minister to the people at the drug houses. And so there were a lot of gangs that were kind of being affected by his ministry on the inner city of Chicago. And so one day he's in the middle of preaching at a youth service. He's in the middle of preaching. And these thugs, these gangbanger thugs just come up the middle of the aisle. And he kind of was like, all right, I'm kind of having service here. But, he kind of stopped. And these gang members look at him, and it's like the head of this gang or whatever. They look at him, and they said, and he said, "Here's the deal. For the last 2 weeks." Well, they said we've been hearing you preach about loving people. We've been hearing you preach about going out and helping the needy. We've heard you preach about being good, whatever. And they said, we didn't believe you. And so for the last 2 weeks, I have had people in my gang that have followed you around day and night. They've watched you with your family. They've watched you put your kids to bed. They watched you play with your kids in the yard. They've watched your wife at home. They've watched you around the clock. And they said, I don't know what it is, but whatever it is that you're preaching, you're living out, and we want it. If I was to follow you around 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, if I was to film your life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, would it make me want to draw closer to Christ? Or would it make me even question that you even know who Christ is? So who do you say that Jesus is with your mouth? Who do you say that Jesus is with your life? And then in this day and age, I think there's a third way. Who do you say that Jesus is in social media? See, because here's the thing. My buddy, he did a lot of research on this, and he did some research on who we are really, and then who we perceive to be on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, at that time on MySpace. For those that are under 20, MySpace was before Facebook. It was different. But now there's Twitter and Instagram. Who do you say that Christ is on those? Not like, hey, what's your religious views? Oh, I'm conservative, Christian, Southern Baptist. But what things are you posting? What pages have you liked? If I went on and did some Facebook stalking and I went through all of the different pages that you liked, and would they be things that are pleasing to God? All of your friends that you're friends with, are they people that you know, or do these random girls friends you and you're like, oh, well, I want to be friends with them. Who do you say that Jesus is with your mouth? Who do you say that Jesus is with your life? And who do you say that Jesus is when you're on the computer? Whether that be social media, whether that be just what you're searching on the internet. And that's, I think that's the question that Jesus is asking you. That's kind of your final exam, your one question. It says, hey, it's a 3-part question. Who do you say that I am? With your mouth. Who do you say that I am with your life? And who do you say that I am on the internet, on social media, on different things like that? Who are you allowing people to perceive you to be? Are you willing to lose your life? Are you willing to lose friends because you know that Jesus has a better life for you? There's got to be things that you have to give up. There's no doubt. There's got to be things that you have to give up. I seen this post on Facebook the other day. And it was a picture of your American Jesus, you know, white, long hair, blonde, blue eyes, beard, whatever. I'm sure that's not how he looked, but that's who it was supposed to be, is Jesus. And this little boy is sitting there, and this little boy's got this little teddy bear. I mean, this little teddy bear about this big in his hand, and he's holding it. And Jesus is standing there, and he's got this big, giant bear, right? Like in his hand, held behind his back. And he's down on his knees, and he's telling the boy, just give it to me. Just give me your bear. Trust me. And the idea is because the little boy's sitting there like, I'm not giving you my bear. And the idea is that Jesus has something greater to give you, something more to share with you, something more to show you. But you're holding on so tight to this little bit that you don't want to give it up, and he wants you to give that up first. What is that in your life? What is it in your life that you're holding on to so tightly that Jesus is like, dude, just give it up. Just give it up. Jesus is calling you to give it up. Are you willing to lose your life for him and his gospel? The invitation this morning is simple. What is it in your life that you need to give up? What is it in your life that Jesus is saying, I see that you got that, and I see that you love it, but you know what? You need to give that up because I got something greater in store for you. Maybe the invitation for you this morning is that those 3 ways that we talked about you sharing who Christ is to you don't match up. And maybe you need to come down and you just need to kneel before Christ and you need to say, hey, look, I want these 3 ways to line up. I don't know. I need help. So whatever that may be, I encourage you in these next couple songs, I encourage you to kind of come down. I encourage you to kind of give that stuff up at the altar. To lay it down at the altar. If you don't leave here changed today, then you've wasted the last hour. If you leave here thinking the same way, acting the same way, then you've wasted the last hour. And so I hope that you're able to say, hey, this is what I need to deal with God. And if you need somebody to pray with, you can come down, you can tap me, I'll pray with you. I know we got some great prayer warriors in here. Trish would be willing to pray with you. I know Courtney would be willing to pray with you. And anybody else, if you need some prayer or whatever, just pull somebody aside and say, hey, will you pray for me? You may not even know what you need prayer for. Just say, hey, just pray over me. And I'm sure they'd be willing to do that. Lord, we just come to you and we just pray, Lord, as you are stirring on our hearts, Lord, that you will show us. You will show us, Lord, what's going on in our lives. You will show us, Lord, what we need to deal with. You will show us, Lord, what we need to give up for you. You will show us the areas of our life that need to be matched up. Because right now we're living three separate lives. We say one thing with our mouth, we say another thing with our life, and then we say even another thing on the social media. And somehow we need those things to align, Lord. And it's bothering us, Lord, because we're wrestling with it, and it's wearing us out, because with one group of friends we're one person, and another group of friends we're another person. Lord, let's line those three things up. And if there's something we need to give up, Lord, give us the strength to recognize that and to lay that down. We pray these things in your precious and holy name. Amen.